Today we are going to be talking about Vancouver BC, obviously, because you clicked on the video. Last week, obviously, we talked about Sydney, Australia. So over the course of this little series we'll be doing this month, we will be talking about Sydney, the Okanagan in BC, Phnom Penh, Cambodia, Toronto, Ontario, and of course today, Vancouver.
So we've both spent some time in Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver for 10 years. How long did you live in Vancouver for?
I want to say like 5 years, like half that time.
We fell in love in Vancouver and we both kind of call Vancouver home, although we're not living there right now. That said, we find 5 to 10 years significant, and we're going to try to frame this video in the way that we're not bringing too many of our personal experiences into it. Definitely when you live in a city for long enough, it starts to become a little bit tainted. But like we've said in our other videos, and we will continue to say again, we feel so lucky to have lived in all these different places. And without a doubt, Vancouver is an amazing place to live. So we're gonna take a step back and kind of talk about what we absolutely love about living in Vancouver. And then we'll only bring up the cons that are worth mentioning in our minds. So if you're planning on moving to Vancouver and you're doing your research right now, then yeah, we're just gonna talk about the city as a whole, and this video might just be for you. We're gonna start off super general here. Vancouver is, of course, a super beautiful city. People who live in Vancouver generally have a very good quality of life. You have the mountains and the ocean. If you want to ski, surf, cycle, skateboard, basically do anything, you can pretty much do any outdoor hobby in Vancouver. It is a playground for people who love the outdoors.
It's a pretty diverse climate.
It's diverse, but it's mild enough that pretty much throughout the year you can do a wide variety of outdoor activities. The education system's really good. In Canada, there is fantastic healthcare. It's a green city, it's a healthy city. People really like to get outside and do stuff there. So as a whole, I can see why Vancouver would be a super attractive city to want to move to. I definitely think that if you're considering moving to Canada in general, I sometimes see this in the travel pages that I'm in. They're like, oh, I'm moving to Canada, where should I go? And Canada is a massive country, which if you haven't been, you might know that, like intellectually, but when you actually live here and you arrive, you start to realize really how big it is. It's not very cheap to travel between the provinces, so if you're planning on moving to Canada in general, then I would really recommend living in Vancouver. And that's coming from me, and I've been to every province and territory in Canada and lived in a few as well. But yeah, let's bring it back to Vancouver and really what makes it so beautiful and great.
Vancouver is a really accepting place, so there is a lot of diverse culture, which also brings in a lot of diverse food, which is a massive benefit of being able to live there. Particularly, Vancouver has some of the best sushi in the entire world, which we happen to love. Because
we're major sushi fans, and Vancouver sushi is definitely top notch. It's so good. So the rumors are true. If you love sushi, you're gonna love Vancouver. Like I said earlier, Vancouver is a very outdoorsy city. So if you're an outdoorsy person, you love to go on hikes, spend time in the ocean, spend time at the beach, go skiing, snowboarding, any of that, hands down, you're absolutely gonna love Vancouver. But that said, if you're not like really an outdoorsy person, which some people aren't, like if you're just totally a city person, it's not that Vancouver doesn't have that to offer for you. You'll definitely be able to like find your little pockets of the city, but it really is so outdoor oriented. You might feel like a little bit of a fish out of the water because people do generally love spending time at the beach, going on hikes and doing that kind of stuff in Vancouver. It's just kind of the culture that there is there. It really depends if that's your thing. But if it is, then Vancouver is definitely your city.
Vancouver is a part of the Lower Mainland. Out like Vancouver and maybe like 2 hours back from that, like east, is all mountains, like all the way back, like big massive mountains. So there's tons of opportunity where you can go up to the top of a lot of those mountains, and there's snowboarding, and then you can come down from the mountain at the end of the day and end up on a beach swimming in the ocean. It's definitely a huge benefit of living there.
There are loads of different beaches in Vancouver. I wouldn't compare them to like the Philippines or Australia because they're not really those like white sand, long,
tropical.
Yeah, tropically beaches. I mean, I guess there are palm trees, a few of them, but it's not really like that. It's so much more like, if you have been to the Pacific Northwest or seen pictures of the Pacific Northwest at all, it has its own kind of feel to it, and the beaches there have their own kind of feel to them as well. But they're really nice, and there are multiple beaches that you can go to. Like, I definitely have my favorite beaches that I prefer over other ones in Vancouver, and the things that really make them different are like the activities that people do at them, or really just like the crowds. I don't know where it comes from, but I'm pretty sure like any like beachy city in the entire world, will have that kind of diversity between each of them. Like the thing is, we talked about the weather being mild, and that's from us. We're Canadian and we think that the weather is mild there. I definitely know that our best friend in Swaziland would think that the beaches in Vancouver are freezing cold. Like even in the summer, it doesn't really go upward of 25 degrees very often. That's like pretty much the hottest it gets.
If you're coming from a hotter country like such as Australia, definitely it's going to be a lot colder. It's a really unique climate.
And that's not for all of Canada. So I think that's a huge misconception that a lot of people have. I think that Vancouver and Whistler and BC in general attract a lot of expats, a lot of travelers, of course, because it's so gorgeous. And then people base their ideas of like Canadian climate off of there. The climate in Vancouver is actually very different than it is in a lot of places in Canada. In other parts of Canada, it dumps snow throughout the winter and then it gets super hot in the summer. It's not like that in Vancouver. It gets like kind of cold and shitty and rainy in the winter, and then in the summer it's like
it's quite mild.
Sunny, but it's mild. Yeah, it's pretty mild.
All year round you get like the mild version of all the seasons. It's not overwhelmingly hot and it's not overwhelmingly cold, which some people love and some people
don't like
as much.
We personally have had this conversation where we're like, what would you rather? Would you rather it be freezing cold and sunny in the winter, like I'm talking like -30 and sunny, or would you rather it be like 5 degrees and rainy and gray? So sometimes I think that I prefer like that kind of mild winter, but you prefer the sunny yet cold winter.
Yeah, it's hard for me. It's a bit of a toss-up.
If you're coming from a hot country, Vancouver might be a really good starter place because it doesn't get as cold as other parts of Canada. We also know that a lot of people, and some people who might be watching this video, also consider moving to BC from other parts of Canada exactly for that reason, because they're trying to escape those freezing cold winters in the other provinces.
Or even from more like northern or eastern BC, like when you go up to something like the Okanagan, which is like 4 or 5 hours east, it's drastically different. You get extreme winters and you get extreme summers, but we'll get into that in another video.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in our Okanagan video coming up.
So Vancouver is a city where the cost of living is very, very high. So if you are coming, then come with a lot of savings.
Yeah, it's really not a good city for minimum wage workers. You're gonna wanna find a job that pays higher than minimum wage. You can make it work. Honestly, people make it work in Vancouver all the time. This is a huge problem, is that the minimum wage in BC isn't that high. So not to be a huge downer, but this is the reality of living in Vancouver. The way that you can kind of twist it into a positive is that there are a lot of free things to do in Vancouver, such as going to the beach or things that we mentioned earlier. But like if you're a skier during ski season, like it's expensive, and the city in general is an expensive city. The rent is high, the pay is low if you're working minimum wage, so you're gonna really need to find a way to work that out. You get what you pay for. It's absolutely beautiful and there's so much to do, but we're not gonna sit here and lie to you and say that it's super affordable, because it just simply is not.
Like Rachel said, there are ways around it. I was working a minimum wage job for a couple of years while living there. There are certain restaurants that you can go to that don't cost as much, and certain places you can go out where it won't cost you as much as a lot of other places, but it's really, really difficult to do.
You have to be crafty.
You have to budget. Crafty. You have to be very, very
kind of creative.
And having a bit of an in, like if you know somebody who lives in the city and knows it well, that's super helpful.
And renting can be a bit competitive. So if you're looking for room shares, there are tons of them. You'll be able to find room shares for sure on Craigslist or on Facebook. But if you're looking for your own place, like you're ready to go in and rent your own place, like on a year lease or whatever, there is a lot available, but there are a lot of people competing for the same apartments. For a lot of apartments, you have to put in like a rental application, all of that. And of course, it just is a really like high volume city, lots of people coming in all the time. So yeah, it can be competitive.
You can find more places just on the outskirts of the city, in places like Burnaby, Surrey, Richmond. There are places just on the outskirts where you can usually find like basement suites or single rooms that you can rent out kind of to yourself, but they're usually a little ways outside of the city and you'd have to transit in, so that's another thing that you have to take into consideration.
For sure. I think that if you're gonna move to Vancouver, just go all in. Just live in Vancouver. You can make it work. Or try.
Do your research. Just before you go, give yourself some time to do some research.
Even coming from me, who's lived in Vancouver for 10 years, when we eventually do move back, because I know at some point in our lives we will, I wouldn't move there without a lot of savings and like some possible job prospects. and kind of an idea of where I'm gonna live. And I find all this important to mention because if you watch our last video on living in Sydney, Australia, the rent prices are super high, but the minimum wage pay is a lot higher. So living there, I had kind of just less of that fear of, you know, not being able to pay my rent. And that is just the reality of the situation for a lot of young people who live in Vancouver. And all this said, Vancouver is not a perfect city. There are a lot of things that I personally don't agree with politically. We need to take way better care of our most vulnerable populations. We won't dive into that too much in this video, but I do think that it's important to mention because, yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and lie and pretend that it is the perfect city to live in. And again, that's just something that's worth researching. If you're moving to a city, you should be doing your research anyway, which I guess you're kind of doing now. So here we are. But to end kind of on a higher note, Vancouver is very accessible to a whole bunch of other different beautiful places in BC. British Columbia as a province is just absolutely amazing. When you move to Vancouver, you don't only get Vancouver, you also get Squamish and Kelowna and Whistler, which a lot of people are attracted to as well. So there are a lot of opportunities for day trips and like little vacations outside of the city.
You can go from being right in the heart of the city on Granville Street downtown, and you can drive an hour outside of that and you have a beautiful camping spot right on a river, mountains, completely isolated. There are not a lot of people that live in Vancouver. I think it's like 650,000 in just Vancouver alone, which if you're not from there, you would know that that's not much at all.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange place because it's kind of like a small town within a big city. That's what I always say, like, or sorry, like a small town painted as a big city. And if you live there and you start to get to know people, like you'll run into them on the street. That doesn't happen in Toronto.
No.
So yeah, all in all, Vancouver is a really beautiful place. We cannot deny that. If you have any questions about moving to Vancouver or living in Vancouver, please let us know. It's definitely the city that we have spent the most time in consecutively together. For this month, we're going to be doing a video like this every week about each of the places that we've lived in the past few years. So if you have any questions about any of the places that we've brought up at the beginning of this video, please do not hesitate to let us know and we will try to include the answers in the videos.